Hi, this is your host. Today we're going to look at the life and ideas of Anaximander. If you'd like to submit a question for the Ask a Philosopher series, you can do so through the link in the description. So Anaximander was a pre-Socratic philosopher who lived from around 610 to 546 BCE. He was a native of Miletus in Ionia, which is now part of Turkey. Anaximander was a student of Thales and a teacher of Anaximenes. So he fits nicely between Thales and Anaximenes in the lineage of pre-Socratic thinkers. Anaximander is also important because he was the first philosopher to write anything down. Unfortunately, none of his writings have survived. But we do have extensive discussions of him in the writings of later philosophers, most notably Aristotle. Now, there are a couple of things that make Anaximander interesting. First, he was the first philosopher to propose an explanation of the cosmos that did not include any gods or other supernatural beings. And second, he was the first to propose an explanation of the cosmos in terms of something coming from something else. That is, he proposed a sort of evolutionary account of how the cosmos came to be. Let's take a look at each of these in turn. First, Anaximander's account of the cosmos was apparently entirely naturalistic. In modern terms, it was a purely scientific theory. This is in contrast to the mythological explanations of the creation of the cosmos that were popular in ancient Greece at the time. According to these myths, the world was created by the gods, either in the form of a religious creation narrative, like that of Hesiod, or in the form of a series of arbitrary acts by the gods. In contrast to these mythological accounts, Anaximander claimed that the world was produced by a natural process that did not require any gods or other supernatural beings. Exactly what this process was, we don't know, since we have no surviving text from Anaximander. But according to Aristotle, Anaximander thought that the world came from a kind of primordial ooze. This primordial substance is often called Apeiron, which has been translated as infinite, as boundless, or as something that is unlimited in some way. It's not clear exactly what Anaximander had in mind with this, but it seems to have been some kind of pure, unadulterated matter that somehow over time became everything else. Now, why he thought that this primordial ooze would eventually become everything else, we don't know, but according to Aristotle, it was because all things have a tendency to move from a state of being more to a state of being less, or from a state of being full of potential to a state of being actual. So this primordial ooze, whatever it was, somehow started to actually exist, and that act of existing caused it to become everything else. Now, again, we don't know exactly what Anaximander meant by all of this, but it seems to be some kind of quasi-scientific explanation of the cosmos. Now, Anaximander wasn't the first Greek philosopher to come up with a naturalistic explanation of the world. That credit goes to his teacher Thales. But Thales' explanation was that the world was produced by water. Anaximander was apparently dissatisfied with this. He thought that water couldn't really explain all of the things that we see around us, and so he tried to come up with something better. Now, we don't know exactly what his explanation was, but it seems that he was looking for some kind of underlying principle. Some one thing that could explain all of the other things that we see around us. And this search for a fundamental principle that explains everything else is a hallmark of the scientific method. So Anaximander gets credit for being the first philosopher to attempt to explain the world in a scientific way. But he is also credited with being the first philosopher to try to explain how the world came into existence, to explain its origins. His account of the origins of the cosmos is related to his naturalistic account, but it's different from it. The naturalistic account explains what the world is made of and how it came about, whereas the account of the origins of the cosmos explains how the world began. And Anaximander's explanation of how the world began was that it began from a process of separation. His view was that the Apeiron, this primordial substance, was in a state of constant flux, and at some point it separated into two parts, into a hot, fiery upper part and a cold, heavy lower part. Over time, the hot and cold separated completely, and that separation produced everything else. Now, just like with his naturalistic account, we don't know exactly what Anaximander meant by all this, but it seems to have been some kind of quasi-scientific explanation of the world's origins. Now, interestingly enough, Plato says that Anaximander also offered an explanation of the moon. According to Plato, Anaximander thought that the moon was a flat disk that emitted light, and he thought that when the moon passed between the sun and the earth, we get an eclipse. In any case, what's important to see here is that Anaximander was trying to explain the world in a scientific way, without appealing to the gods. And that's a really important development in the history of philosophy. Anaximander was trying to show that we can understand the world simply by looking at it and reasoning about it. We don't need the gods to tell us how the world works. This was a radical idea, and it's one that has had a huge influence on Western philosophy ever since. So thanks for watching. If you'd like to submit a question for the Ask a Philosopher series, you can do so through the link in the description. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe.